I do think small amounts of Bitcoin are going to be worth astronomical amounts of value in the future. Oh, I just got 30,000 sats back. That's college for the kids in 20 years. And something like that might very well be true.
I'm concerned that as the timeline of this curve shrinks, as technology iterates faster and faster and faster, it only becomes increasingly more important that we
Wow.
keep
When Bitcoin hits $1 million per Bitcoin, that's 1 cent a sat. But why wouldn't it be 2 cents a sat? Why wouldn't it go to that on the overnight?
Cedric Youngelman, thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure. It's very appreciated that you're taking the time to join me on my show here. It was a fun time to join your show in early 2023. You were one of the first podcasts I went on right after Preston Pish and Joe Burnett. So I appreciate you having me on your show. And likewise, I'm excited to have you on here. And I'm looking forward to talking about Bitcoin, Bitcoin philosophy, Bitcoin's impact on the world, Bitcoin's humanitarian impact for current and future generations. And then, of course, some good old fashioned number go up stuff and trying to communicate that future world to the present world. So, Cedric, thanks for joining me.
Sure, I'm super excited to join you, Luke. We talked in May. I mean, it's only been 6 months. It feels like 2 years or more, which is in Bitcoin years. That kind of makes sense, or epochs, but it feels like forever. So much, I think, has changed. That was one of the biggest shows I released at the time, The Revolutionary Impact of Bitcoin, a conversation with Luke Broyles about the world's first perfect money. I remember that was when you kind of came on the Bitcoin Twitter scene, and you've been kind of dropping fire threads ever since, especially this fall.
Thanks. But yeah, I appreciate the compliments. Yeah, it's been a blast. It is funny. I think most people, even those listening to this, can relate to this about how time in Bitcoin is way different than time outside of Bitcoin. I have my own guess of why that is. I think it's because we're on like a different technological curve as to other people, right? Most people are on the normal everyday curve, right? Everyday life. And I think that curve is steep. That curve is a lot steeper than it was a generation ago. And that curve is steeper than it was generations before that. But I think the curve, Cedric, you and I are on is way different than what most people are on, right? Like I think the Bitcoin adoption curve is just so much faster. And so I think that's why time just feels so different, is because like our literal understanding of the world, right? As technology changes, our worldview changes. And so I think, at least for me and my guess, I think that's why it feels so much longer. That
Yeah, it
doesn't feel real 6 months ago. Yeah.
feels like waiting for Godot, or for the world to catch up to the new reality. It must have been, maybe when the number zero was being debated, and the church was maybe fighting it, or some institutions were fighting the idea of the number zero, and people saying, hey, there is no number zero. You can't go to the market and buy zero apples, you fool. And you're arguing with the
Yeah.
masses, and I mean, I think it was Jay-Z who said it, but like, never argue with a fool, because from far away people can't tell who's who. um, and you find yourself, especially out there, arguing with people, and if you've put in the work, you can tell very quickly if someone is uninformed on the subject matter, and yet they continue to pontificate on it, or maybe get on their soapbox, or even just fight you on ideas you're trying to present. So it can be very frustrating, waiting for everyone to catch up, and living in the Bitcoin matrix, because you're still in the fiat matrix every day, even if you're, in that Bitcoin overlay in your mind, and you're doing, maybe using even Bitcoin, you're an advanced user and you're using Bitcoin as a unit of account, and it's really helping you, but everyone you're trading with, as doesn't see that. And all the price signals are still really screwed up in the real world economy. None of the prices make sense in dollar terms or fiat terms. And
Right.
you could translate that into Bitcoin, but they're still wonky, and it's still reserved. You can see it in Bitcoin. Bitcoin's not volatile, but fiat is incredibly volatile, and you see it in the price of Bitcoin. But imagine trying to make all those calculations. I mean, people are like, I can't use Bitcoin. I mean, imagine using Bitcoin as my money. That'd be so difficult. Well, well, that's what we see with fiat when you're on a Bitcoin standard. You see how difficult that is. And Bitcoin's just a reflection of that fiat volatility. So you could see how frustrated they are. Your money makes no sense. And you're like, well, yeah, on your bad money, my good money makes no sense. And you just got to wait, because you can unlike other arguments you can have with people, you can actually, there's a ledger here and you can prove things mathematically. So,
Yeah.
it's unlike politics or culture or social issues, there's a right and wrong answer here. Uh, at least I feel that way, or I feel certain about that. And I think it's rational. I don't think it's just a belief.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those are good points. I think the tech curve argument, like I stated before, I think that's a component of it. But I think the other component, and perhaps even the far more important one, is what you just said, that it's like not only are we on a faster curve of change, but the curve of change we're on is inherently the opposite that the curve everyone else is on, right? The curve everyone else is on is down exponentially into tyranny, CBDCs, and all that. We're on a faster curve up into freedom and prosperity, right? So it's like it's not even the curve steeper, but it's like it's a different curve. And I think, I was having a conversation with someone recently about what you just said about, oh, Bitcoin's so volatile. And I was like, no, it's the American political currency unit. That's what's volatile.
Right.
We skyrocketed our interest rates, everything's changed. And this person had been watching my videos for about a year now, right? I mean, about as long as I've been posting them, pretty much. And it's he just didn't get it, right? And so it still took time. So anyway, um, people will get it though. I think
But
people
I think a
listening need
lot
to hear
about
that. Yeah,
what Cretius or Jesse Myers talks about is the comparison to the Oregon Trail. And I think even if you're on the right path, or you understand the risk you're taking, or the lay of the land, and I do believe that good choices tend to lead to the best results and bad choices tend to lead to the worst results, but that's probabilistic and it's not always the outcome. And you could find yourself on the Oregon Trail making a lot of good decisions and make one bad decision and lose it all. And so even on for to there's a lot of responsibility when you are an adventurer or an explorer. And so there can be outsized rewards, but there is outside risk that you are knowingly taking on, or maybe even unknowingly. But it's what I'm trying to say is, like, you could make mistakes doing the right thing, or you could be a casualty doing the right thing. I always try to eliminate chaos in my life or disorder so that random bad events don't happen to me. Um, but I think, just Bitcoiners out in fiat world are still going to have, banking issues or job issues or fiat job issues or anything like that that could lead to misfortune, even though they're on the Bitcoin trail.
right. I think a literal example of that is custody, right? I mean, you and
Yeah,
I both think about that
that's
a
one of the
lot.
ones I'm alluding to.
Think
Yeah.
about Yeah, but yeah, it's a good illusion, right? I mean, I think there's multiple illusions there, right? Obviously, people can be on the Oregon Trail and they get distracted by yield products or other
Mm.
tokens or whatever, or they get distracted by good things, right? Like I meet people all the time that become super passionate about, non KYC Bitcoin or coin joining or this or that and the other, but then unfortunately, over allocate or over allocate their funds to overextend their capabilities and to where they lose funds, or more commonly in just self custody in general, they move a little too fast and make a misstep, right? So I don't want to braid that point too much, but
Well, I
in
think it's
this
a really
Oregon
important
Trail,
point.
yeah,
I think if
yeah,
if
yeah,
you're not valuing what you have in Sats terms, then and meaning you're more concerned about getting more, or leveraging or risking more, or you're not caring for what you have. You're going to find yourself not getting to the destination with as many Sats as you once had, due to all those unforeseen risks and volatility. And I think it's also, you're not bullish enough because you're also saying what I have is not going to be enough, and what you have is probably going to be
yeah,
more than enough if you've had any interest in this for any extended period of time. um, one thing I try to, even just getting across people, American Hollow was talking about this, but $5 a day for the next 5 years is going to make people, uh, I think, gonna, not financial advice, but I think even those kind of small terms in terms of a Starbucks a day, I think is going to exponentially lead to better results than a lot of people can imagine or consider when they think about putting $5 away when, they intuitively know that doesn't grow. and it doesn't add up to much. So I think that, yeah, you're completely undervaluing if you're not securing in the right way. And part of that is, moving through security, from beginner to intermediate to advanced, and not, a year ago or so, I'd hear people in spaces like, get every, Satoshi off your exchange. And you'd be talking, sometimes they'd be talking to noobs, and it's like somebody like Jimmy Song would be like, hey, we don't know what this person's capable of. And maybe they're better off putting a smaller amount in and testing things. And so even how you move someone through the phases, and what they're comfortable with, or what kind of assistance they could get. But yeah, value what you do have. And I think I was talking about this with Alex Svetsky last night. So a lot of people think with gold there's so much gravitas, there's so much charge. You hold a small piece of gold and you can feel its weight, and you feel how valuable it is, and it's intuitive. And that's because it's been with us for generations. And I think habits of our ancestors. This is what Svetsky was talking about, become our instincts. With Bitcoin, it's already there. It's just, it felt like, kind of like you were saying, how we're on the curve differently. People intuitively, like, they're like nervous to send Bitcoin. And everything about sending Bitcoin is very intuitive and familiar to humans in the 21st century. Entering an alphanumeric address, an email address is an alphanumeric address, and a certain amount of digits, and you have to get it right, and you send it to the right place. Now, obviously, there's a third party that might be able to step in or help out if you make a mistake and fix your boo-boo. But there's also, I think, the intuitive notion that if I make a mistake and I don't get this $20 back, they're making more of this thing. And so I'm not losing a finite, scarce thing. So it's not just that there's a third party and the centralization and trust, but it's that there's this notion of this thing is infinite. Whereas I think with Bitcoin, people even sending 5, 10, $20 are very nervous. They do test runs, and it's because of that gravitas that's already there. They realize if I lose it, yeah, there's no one to help me, maybe no third party that's going to replace it for me. But the reason they can't just replace is they don't either own the ledger, or they can't just make more or institute more or emit more into the program. So there's already that gravitas with Bitcoin. People just, I think, misinterpret it as, oh, this newfangled thing. I don't want to, it's weird. I'm scared. But that fear is its weight, its charge, its power, that I think is already being misinterpreted, but it's there already.
I think a huge part of it is that it's digital too, right? I
Mm.
mean, it's like I've seen large amounts of money in a single place, like in banks or otherwise, and I think probably most people have, but for those that haven't, it's like if you see, $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 of cash, like just
Mm.
sitting there, it's it has a weird feeling. It's weird because it's just paper, but you have like this emotional reaction to it. In fact, I don't really like it typically. It feels cringy. But the difference though is that if you take $100,000 of cash, you put it in a vault, you close the vault, just because it's an analog object in the real world, we know it's still there. But most people with Bitcoin, because it's digital, it's like it's not intuitive, right? I mean, I do Google Meets and Zoom calls all the time. In fact, I had trouble with the Zoom call on this one. And it's like it's digital stuff is hard, right? And
Well, I'm
it's
curious
like no
how,
matter
I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm just so
no,
curious
no,
what
no. Yeah,
context when you see large piles of cash, because I think there's a charge to that for a different reason. I think it stands out as an anomaly in the fiat matrix because it's not supposed to
right,
be there. And you're like, what is this? Is this
right,
person a drug dealer? Like
right.
where, like, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, unless you're in a bank or, maybe a business, but
Yeah.
even most businesses are not dealing with large sums of cash unless, nowadays it's marijuana and federal or state law issues. And
Mhm.
maybe, and I get that there's a charge there, but maybe when you see like an armored van vehicle, and there's a lot of
Mhm.
cash in
Yeah.
there. But yeah, I'm curious.
But there
Yeah.
but there could be $1 billion of Bitcoin on my cell phone, right? I mean, there's not obviously no one robbed me.
Well, it could
But
be in your
it's like
mind.
even
That's what's powerful about it. You could
it
walk
can be in your
through,
mind, right?
a
Yeah.
very violent, low, a high risk city with a lot of crime, let's say, and you could walk through this city with, looking like a common person, and no one would know the wealth you're shepherding through, this dangerous zone where you wouldn't carry large sums or bags of money, or and even just think about in, some developing nations where they're remitting a lot of money from, the Western world back home, and people have to take a 5 hour bus ride and stand in line in an ATM for 2 hours. And they're a target now walking around with 50, 100, $200 in cash because it's obviously they just went to an ATM and and they got to make the long trek home. And Bitcoin, obfuscates or solves so much of that. It's that's what's mind boggling as well, and the digital nature of it. But I don't see my kids really having any issue with the digital nature of it in terms of, oh, that's weird, or being worried about losing it because everything's digital to them. And it was so
Right.
interesting to me when, and unfortunately, they were on devices at a younger age or youngish age. So, 2, 3, 4 years old, they were used to what an iPhone could do. And walk over to an iPhone and you can pinch it and zoom in on a picture. So I remember the first time, 12, 18 months, 24 months, 36, they walked over to TVs and tried to zoom in on the TV because they were just
Oh,
used to that
wow.
technology. I mean, why wouldn't it be everywhere? Um, and so that world to them is just familiar, um, which is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating because us adults, we actually have to learn about the tech from an outside perspective. But the kids almost are, as the engineers always say, first principles, right? I mean, it's like screens you pinch, so TV's a screen, so therefore, yeah, that's. I don't have kids, so I've not seen stuff like that. But yeah, that's really interesting to think about. Okay, so we've been talking about Bitcoin, the digital nature of, let's say it's far easier for a refugee to carry $1 billion of Bitcoin than $10,000 of cash, right? If they're trying to escape
Can't even go on a
Ukraine
plane with
or,
$10,000 cash. They
right,
mark you up for
right,
that. They ask you to declare it.
exactly, exactly, yeah. So that's the more pessimistic way. I think the optimistic way, perhaps. I think to your earlier point of how people don't realize that just $5 of Bitcoin a day could be life changing in the long term future. I think I think to merge these points together is that the reason people don't understand that is because they don't realize this digital nature, right? Like, in the same, like the very reason why people have a hard time understanding the ability for Bitcoin just to flee out of your hand and be gone forever is the same reason why they don't understand the real bullishness of it. So $5 a day, why do you think $5 a day or a Starbucks coffee a day is potentially life changing? Like, can you break that down for us?
Well, I mean, you could start with everything divided by 21 million and just, the enormous vacuum and store of value that's there right now. When you think about something that's really interesting, is like, how is Bitcoin going to dematerialize everything and sort of uh, reconstruct the debt stack? And Jeff Booth talks a lot about this. You think about how Bitcoin's going to reprice real estate. One way I never really thought about it, though, is that it's going to literally dematerialize skyscrapers. And you see this with working from home and the way the culture is changing. So people are not going to the office as much. And the skyscrapers that are already constructed can't be anything but corporate offices. The Empire State Building cannot be turned into condos. There's no windows in the interior. It'd be cheaper to take it down and build it up again from scratch for condos than it would be to retrofit it, unless you would make only 80 one-floor apartments that would be sold for 80 million a piece. And how many buyers do you have? And throughout a city like New York. So it literally, so nothing out there has its actual real market value. Nothing is marked to market right now in any of the assets, from real estate to bonds to stocks. But it literally can bring down skyscrapers in terms of the way we look at the world. So I do think small amounts of Bitcoin are going to be worth astronomical amounts of value in the future. And I mean, people joke about it now, but like I remember, during bull runs, you see it more, but people are like, oh, where you can get like sats back for buying something. And they'd be like, oh, I just got 30,000 sats back. That's college for the kids in 20 years. And something like that might very well be true. Um, so yeah, I do think a really small stack of sats is going to be worth a lot of money. You just look at how many people there are in the world, how much Bitcoin there is. And I think that Bitcoin is just rationally better money. So I don't know what time scale you want to look at, but I think better money wins. It's just, we've seen this in Africa with slave beads. And if you can go somewhere and buy 10 lifetimes of value just by counterfeiting money, why wouldn't you do that? So those cycles are going to continue. And people who don't move to a Bitcoin standard are going to eventually get bought out. So it's in, so from that way, it's game theory. Like it's in the best interest of your descendants, whether you move there or they move there, for them to, so yeah, I think it's just astronomically going to be very valuable in the future. I don't like really talking in dollar terms or anything like that, because it just
Yeah.
doesn't, and there's no timeline I could really point to, because it's no one understands this stuff yet. And that almost sounds like, I don't like to say that because it sounds arrogant, but I don't even understand it yet. How could I? And so I'm saying it more from that perspective. Not no one like you and I understand it, and a few listeners, like, no one understands this, and how it may go, and how long it may take, or how quickly it could go.
I think that's a really good point, is that none of us really understand where this is going. I think, I bring it up all the time, but the exponential curve, right? It's like we have this curve that's getting more and more dramatic exponentially again and again and again. And I think Cedric probably, you or I, let's say, are maybe 3 years ahead of, let's say, the average Bitcoiner, right? That's not saying that we're smarter. It's just saying we're a little farther ahead, right? I attribute that just because you and I are in this space all day, every day. Most Bitcoiners, have fiat jobs, they have lives.
Right.
This is our life, right? So I think for that reason alone, maybe, the average person like us is maybe a year or two or a couple of years ahead the average Bitcoiner. Then the average Bitcoiner is probably years ahead of the average person with Bitcoin on Coinbase, and then that person is years ahead of the average person, right? And then even in the general population, there might be people ahead and behind or whatever, and then the government's like 10 years behind everything, right? So, but I think the reason people think you or I, quote unquote, know a lot is not actually because we know a lot. It's just that we're like a year or two ahead, right? And I think in 5 years, this conversation, even what we're talking about, may age really poorly. And I mean, you know, and it's funny to think about, but it's like how that nature can change over time. I know you don't like talking about fiat prices much. I
I
don't
mean, I
mind
will. I don't
because
mind. It's
I
fun. I
think,
mean,
yeah,
I
yeah,
love it.
yeah.
It's just that, I don't think that, I think that doesn't age that well per se, or maybe it will, some of it. Um, wow. I just think that's, I try to give it its, if I do talk about it, it has its place. And if it comes up organically, or, I think it could add value. Um, it's interesting. You're thinking about other parallels, not to Bitcoin, but just in terms of, you're talking about like S curves, or curves of value. Look at Amazon, and very early on, certain people could understand the value proposition of Amazon, where they weren't just competing with Barnes and Noble. They eventually they would compete with all of retail, and that was hard to get across to people, because even the Barnes and Noble example was an incredible value proposition if Amazon could catch Barnes and Noble and Borders and etc. But no one, and you think about some of the cycles that Amazon went through. Amazon has crashed at least 90% 3 times. In like 2000, it went from over $100 to like $6 in like 8 months. Only Jeff and his parents held. But nobody in 1995 or 1996, 97, I saw Amazon AWS coming, which was a whole, and which is probably 2/3 of Amazon's business now. So, even Jeff, knowing the value proposition that he was building, that if he could get there and be the retail destination for everything in the world, or in the Western Hemisphere, that's way bigger than Barnes and Nobles. And even if you get to Barnes and Nobles, he's offering his shareholders a great return. But they didn't see Amazon AWS coming,
That's
and
a
the
good point.
exponential value. And then, I think a lot about the first people to find gold, walking in some hills somewhere, and the first gold was probably pretty easy to find compared to subsequent finds and digs. And and before they found the gold, they were probably all looking for something like it, if not already using other rocks and metals. And so these guys came down from the top of some hill and were like, we got it, guys. Like, we found the thing and we want 10 cents a rock. And people are like, are you kidding me? Like, there's no way you found something better than that we already have. And but so eventually they sold out at 10 cents and they went back up there and maybe they brought a few more people with them and came back and wanted 15 cents, and people are like, come on, get out of here. Why am I giving you 15 cents? Yesterday you wanted 10. And eventually they came back and were like, we need $10 a rock, whatever it is. I'm making, people like that is crazy. And none of them could have seen central banks and fiat and everything built on top of gold and telecommunications and sort of Western Union and gold notes and banking. But they knew they found the thing. At least the ones who stuck with it very early on and maybe passed it on to their descendants in some way, or the knowledge. And it started somewhere. And I'm sure some people were like, "That's not it. We got to keep looking." And then other people were like, "Maybe that's it, but you guys seem to have an advantage finding it." And you keep saying it's harder to get now, but how do I know? you
What
know,
backs it? What backs your gold?
right. And I don't care that you took
Right?
out a bunch of loans to buy equipment and hire people. And why is the price going up? And how do I know it is what you say it is?
Yeah. That's an interesting thought. Imagine the first ancient society, like at the very early adoption curve of gold. In reality, it probably wasn't like this. It was probably more like your kid's example with the pinching a TV. Eventually, it was just organic. But that'd be a funny conversation in the ancient days. Like, why would I trade my goats or my whatever for gold? Nothing backs the gold. Help me
Or more for
understand. And then
that rock than the other rock you used to
yeah,
offer.
yeah. Right. It's not as abundant, oh, gold will never work because there'll never be enough for everyone, right? I mean, it's the same kind of stuff. Obviously, it's, different, but it'd be funny to imagine that might be like a funny Bitcoin ad or something, is like, or a short movie is like someone trying to explain gold has value because it takes energy to make,
Right.
like basically like taking the sailor quotes and making it about gold. But
Something so
yeah,
interesting
that,
about gold is
uh-huh.
how evenly distributed it is in the earth in terms of imagine if all the gold was in one place, and sort of one civilization just had that geographical distribution of, sort of advantage and could guard the gold, all new gold came through sort of one group of people. Uh,
Well, I
it's
think that's the idea of the Bitcoin halving, right? Is that Bitcoin supply issuance, kind of, except instead of geographically dispersing it like gold, Bitcoin halvings try to disperse it throughout time, right? So, between 2009 and 2140, right? I mean, is that, like, to me, that's what makes the most sense, the comparison there, having and
well, I think it's also just sort of we all had the opportunity to learn about this thing earlier, and put our mind to it whenever we got to it. So everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve, or admits they were wrong about Bitcoin. But you bring up the halving, and it's you just zoom out and you look ahead, and future halvings get down to 4 cents a block, not cents, two sats a block, and for the last 4 years, I guess 1 sat a block or something along those lines. And for Bitcoin to work, you just imagine the amount of energy that's going to be poured into, the amount of sats coming out at that point. So right there, you can kind of say for the whole system to work, those new sats or the value of those sats and all sats in the system at that point have to be so incredibly valuable for people to continue to put the energy into the network and sell their energy to the network for the return that they're being offered to by the network. Because it's not a volunteer outfit of miners or hashers. It's not no one, they don't want to donate their power, their energy. And the whole thing at that point, you'd think that value of that sat has to be so valuable that even such large institutions like nation states or whatever conglomerates are operating at that point would point their energy at that rather than just destroying each other and taking each other's value. because that's the amount of value they have to put in terms of energy to extract those satoshis. And why wouldn't they just go to war and take value from each other freely if that was more valuable than what they were extracting with the power they're going to use? So that tells you how
And
valuable satoshis will be in the future if this system continues to operate the way it has been and the way we think it's going to continue on that linear path. Not linear is not the right word. Yeah.
but Cedric, I mean, you say that most people just their eyes glaze over, right? And that's where the whole fiat price number is like. It's that's why I use so many fiat numbers in my titles and my thumbnails, and people are like, "Oh, clickbait," but it's like it's so frustrating because it's like I fully get it, like I'm in the wave like you just said, right? But most people are just there's so many years behind where the curve is, that they're still thinking in fiat, and so it's like this dilemma of like, how do we help people jump along the curve as quickly as possible? And it's
You
just
don't,
terrifying.
you
Just
don't. It's hard.
yeah, yeah,
It
it's
really,
very
it's
hard.
about, it's the marshmallow test. It really is the marshmallow test. Like, how long do you want to wait for good things to happen or for things to get better exponentially? Not everyone wants to wait. And the money is designed against wanting us to wait. And so I guess, so you could talk about sort of the external factors and what Bitcoin does for humanity and changes our incentives and sort of reorients our culture and probably a lot of our institutions. But until we get there, the individual, it's really hard to, because I think a lot of people, and I've thought a lot about orange pilling, and I think most of it is extremely futile. Um, I think, and if we could talk about it, if you will, but most people don't want to sound like us. So right off the bat, they're like, wow, if Luke and Seth are right, like I'm gonna go around sounding like them, this is crazy. So right then and there, they're like, they got blockers up. And there's so much more to that where people are generally speaking trading against the person telling them about the idea. So they're going, oh, wow, um, I kind of want this person to be wrong so that I don't have to put the effort and energy into figuring out why they might be right. And if they are right, then, maybe they'll always be a little ahead of me on this little journey, and that's no good. So I'd rather root against them and just, go find my own lottery ticket. Because, I've known Luke since he's 5 years old. The odds of Luke finding, the future reserve currency of the world before CNN tells me about it is kind of low. So I'll go and go find my own lottery ticket, and there's a whole, I can go on for hours about that, just that mentality that sets in when you try to orange pill someone or to inform them. Um, and I think, it's one of the reasons I started the podcast because I didn't want, I was so excited about it. I wanted to talk to people about it, but no one wants to be preached to. And generally speaking, even if they're open to hearing you, they got about an hour tops. And you and I could talk about this all day, and the implications and, so that's a really tough one to sell, I think it's really important to maybe tell people, hey, if you have questions, I'm here. I'd love to give you some time if you have questions, but and only go as far as maybe their questions go, or really go the opposite route. Just say, hey, maybe Bitcoin's not for you yet, and just walk away. Use reverse psychology. Um,
That's what I do at this point. I got asked a lot. You brought up my family, or families in general, and yeah, people ask me a lot. Luke, did your family get it? And I've said this before about Cydia, and that no, they don't really. There's varying degrees, but most of them don't own Bitcoin. Vast majority of them don't own Bitcoin. Some of them do, a little bit. Some of them do in exchanges. Some actually took self custody. But yeah, it's very low, and to be honest, I think that's partially why the threads and the YouTube videos bling up so quick. So it very surprised me, because everyone in my life, family and otherwise, they were all very supportive, like glad you're passionate, but it didn't click with them. So because that was my world, my bias, I figured, oh, okay, it's not going to click with anyone. But then on online Bitcoin world, that really popped off, right? And in the same way, your podcast has exploded. Like, I love your podcast. I mean, I'd love to hear more about the behind the scenes of that. I mean, like how long have you been doing it? I mean, you have just an incredible guest list. I mean, we talk about how Bitcoin yeah, a little bit of Bitcoin is going to be super valuable in the future. And I think like, goodness, people are going to look back at you and me and all these other Bitcoiners and be like, holy cow, Cedric, you like every single one, every single episode is like a legendary guest, like back in the early days before that, like in the same way you mentioned like Jeff Bezos is Amazon. It's like, I don't think even Jeff Bezos understood the S curve of Amazon. I don't even think Elon Musk understood the S curve of all his companies. And I think probably most people you're having on your show, like the majority of incredible things are yet to do, they haven't even conceived of yet. Right. And so, anyway, I remember a little point there, but like, how does that feel for you've been doing this way longer than me? I just want to pick your brain on that. Like, tell me about it.
Well, I mean, it's definitely it's been a journey and an unexpected ride. I have my full-time day career. I'm an accountant by trade, and uh, I think that's one of the reasons I was drawn to Bitcoin and trying to understand this ledger. But I it reignited my desire to learn and um, quench for that, and I really wanted to deepen my knowledge of Bitcoin. Or really, I mean, there's so many reasons why I started the pod. Everything from the pandemic to getting my children to see, what you can do with technology from home. I've always wanted to create content and love the idea of creating a channel from scratch and having my own thing. And that's been probably one of the most rewarding parts. I figured even if I don't release any episodes, I could create a time capsule of what my journey was, or what I was thinking about or questioning at the time. Because I think around when I started the show with the pandemic and Bitcoin, it was a very uh, felt like an inflection point in my life. I wanted to come out of the pandemic with new skills, and it was, I love the medium of podcasting, but something I'd never found a subject before that I felt I could spend my whole life exploring until I found Bitcoin. Other than maybe love in my marriage, but I don't know if anyone wants to hear that, weekly. So Bitcoin was this lens to look at the world and explore the world, and money impacts everything. That's the way that the subject matter is, unexhaustible. Then the other thing was that just through Bitcoin and Bitcoin Twitter, I had some reach that I never expected to have. So if I wanted, like my favorite show ever is, What the Fuck with Mark Maron, WTF with Mark Maron. He's a famous comedian. He interviews other famous comedians and personalities. There's, what makes that show interesting is, that he knows these people and they have a connection, or, especially early on in the beginning. Um, so Bitcoin, I could actually reach out to someone like Pierre Richard, which I did one night, a little drunk on a Saturday night. I DM'd him like, "Hey, I'd love to start a Bitcoin podcast. What do you think?" And he was like, "I'll do it." The next morning, he like DM'd me at 8 a.m. He's like, "Let's do it. Let's do it this week." And the fact that Bitcoiners were so generous with their time, and I think courageous for to go on, someone's show I didn't even put out like a show yet, and to say yes, and they don't even know what they're going to be asked. So it was, and I wanted to get the opportunity to ask questions and see, if I could ask interesting questions. I would always listen to podcasts and be like, "Oh, I want to go here. I want to go further," or create this moment, for other listeners, or what it was. So, and then part of it was I orange pilled my wife, and I would come home and she'd be listening to what Bitcoin did every day in the kitchen. And so that was kind of the final straw. I was like, "Hey, maybe you could listen to my show if I, instead of Peter's." Uh, so, and then I guess in terms of the guests, I mean, I think the most smartest people in the world are drawn to Bitcoin. So obviously there's, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Every time I meet with a guest, even someone like, puts out a new book, and it's just like, wow, like, I was like, how could I read another book about Bitcoin? And then I read a book, then someone's new book, and it's another way to look at it, and it takes the conversation further. So sorry to ramble there for a bit. But yeah, it's just been an incredible journey. And for me, I mean, it's just a lot of proof of work. I like I said, I mean, do it on top of my regular gig and the wife and kids and the family and all those commitments. So And there were a lot of times where I just was like, wow, I don't even know if I can carry this anymore. But it's a passion project. As you know, there's not a lot of money in podcasting. Um, but and then there's the
I I finally got a mic and a light. Everyone's always
right.
like, Luke, you got to upgrade, and you know, yeah, no, yeah, yeah, Cedric does a set of passion. I can tell that.
Well, it takes a lot of work. I mean,
Yeah,
even
that's great.
just the
Oh,
scheduling is like a full-time job. These are very busy people. We're all very busy now, and a lot of people, the guys and girls I talk to, they're building, especially during a
yeah.
bear market.
How
And
many hours? People listening may not care, but I'm curious. How many hours does a full episode take you? I know how much it takes for me. I'm curious what it does for you.
I don't know. I mean, anywhere from like 10 to 40, maybe 60, depending on the guest. I mean, I'd say in general, round it out about 15 to 20. Depends on how you look at
Yeah,
it.
to
Way more if you count like all the times I'm thinking about it, but I'm not working on it. Like a lot of people,
mhm,
like people run their own business. Like you don't take Christmas off. Like you're thinking about what you do, and maybe that's even some of
yeah.
your most productive time. You're playing with the kids or enjoying a meal and you don't have a deliverable or a deadline that day, but you're still thinking about what needs to get done and how to get it done, what might be the best approach. Um, but even just the scheduling, the show itself, recording it, editing it, the social media. I mean, you're looking at 6, 8, 10 hours. And then I like to put in a lot of research because I try to create an evergreen show. And, I especially, I mean, I treat this as a once in a life opportunity to get to talk to these people about their ideas. And I don't want to leave anything on the table or on the field, so try to, so yeah, a lot of work. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's about 8. For me, it's about 8 hours. Reaching the person, scheduling with the person, sometimes rescheduling, tech difficulties, editing, downloading, uploading,
oh
you
man,
know, thumbnails.
cancellations.
It's
I
cancellations.
take
It's the
off a day from
worst.
work, cancellation. Oh man, it's brutal. Talk about a setback. And I know things come up in people's lives, and and I've definitely gone on the journey of seeing, look, so many people are so generous in the beginning, but the show gets bigger, I get bigger reach. People I couldn't reach in the beginning are a little bit more reachable now. Um, it's very interesting. And one of the things that have been really great is I wanted to be part of the Bitcoin space because I wanted to go and meet people and I didn't want to just be like a fanboy or just I wanted to contribute. I wanted to have a seat at the table and um, yeah, and then that part of the journey has been awesome to meet people, to meet listeners, to meet guests in person. It's sometimes I'll be at a party and someone like Greg Foss could be sitting next to me and he might not even recognize me right away. Maybe I got a hat on or something, and someone's like, Greg, that's said. And said, holy shit, it's you. And just because people look different on Zoom than they do in real life sometimes. And um, it's been awesome, to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Definitely meeting people in real life is something that's way different than on Zoom. And it is funny how it's like that it is something that took me by surprise. I tend to be an optimist by heart. Most people are probably not surprised with that. But just the amount of work it takes to make content and do it, it's just a lot, and I think likewise that's how it is with everything. Like people think, oh, it's easy to understand Bitcoin, but it's like, no, it takes, oh, it might take 10 hours to read about Bitcoin or whatever. Like, oh, the white paper is only 8 pages. How hard could it be? But, here you are with, you know, 2 shelves of Bitcoin books, thousands of pages. And most people listening probably watched, 1,000 videos and 10 books and, whatever. But it's anyway, it's funny how those things are time black holes and we enjoy
Well,
it.
yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. Definitely, there are unenjoyable aspects of it. And I encourage anyone who, wants to create content or a Bitcoin podcast to do it. It's always going to feel like you're late to the game. But the audience is always growing. People are always craving new voices. People are always burning out of old voices. It's sort of the individual podcast listener's journey. Um, They kind of evolve. The topics they listen to evolve. They fall in love with a host or show, and they give it usually about 12, 18 months, and then maybe move on to something else. People are always kind of, I think, yearning for a voice they can relate to. So whether maybe you get into Bitcoin in the beginning to understand what it is, then maybe you want to explore the philosophy of it, then maybe you want to get into the technical side of it so you can learn how to secure it or interact on Lightning. So there's so many different paths. I remember when I started my show, I thought, wow, it already seems saturated. I remember shows that started around the time I did. Some are still around, most are not. I can tell you shows that started after mine did, some around, most are not. It is hard. I think that's the biggest part. I think a lot of people underestimate just how much goes into it and to maintain it. But yeah, I think and it can give you everything you put into it. You can get out of it. So
So speaking of putting energy in and getting rewards out, when it comes to people buying Bitcoin today, we talked a little bit about how much Bitcoin it takes to have a significant savings or a significant amount of wealth in the future. One of the things that came to mind, I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the things that came to mind is when I was in Miami at the Bitcoin conference, there was some advertisement giving out 50,000 sats per person. And like you said earlier, Cedric, I did the math in my head about, wow,
mm,
50,000 sats. That's a lot of money, right? If there's, let's see, if there's 21 million Bitcoin, 8 billion human beings, 100 million sats of Bitcoin, you do the math out, that's 260,000 sats a person. And then you factor in power law, you factor in Pareto distribution, you realize, that the stack of papers that this guy was just handing out as ads for, I don't even remember the company. That's sorry, it's a Bitcoin company, but I didn't care. I just wanted the stats. But that's why they put it on there. But it's like the stack, that's like, he's holding like 500 lifetimes
yeah.
potentially. Like, if really 20,000, 50,000, or a few 100,000 sats is like a lifetime's worth of energy savings in half a century or a century, it's just crazy, right? It's like the same feeling. Like in that moment, I remember it's like the same feeling as the analog cash in the bank vault, but except
Right.
it's just a little stack of business cards he's holding. And it's like that is more than
But
that.
it's
And it's just
nothing in
like,
fiat. So, I mean, it's
yes.
a marketing budget.
Uh-huh.
So right now that's probably $25 a piece of paper, 50,000 sats, but maybe back then, maybe it was worth less in fiat terms. First of all, the company that's issuing that probably has those addresses. I mean, I hope to God they have those addresses and they can claw those stats back if they're not claimed. So whether people take the sheets, whether people claim, they're getting the advertising out, they're getting the piece of paper out. And in terms of referral rates, if they're trying to, if that was for a BlockFi type platform and they're hoping you come in there and throw 1,000, 10,000, or 100 grand into some stupid product to get a customer for 5, 10, 20, $25 is not a lot of money to turn over a customer, especially if you can claw it back. It is Bitcoin. You don't have to give them the only private key. So, but yeah, no, it is fascinating how much this stuff is floating around. I mean, back in the day, there was a Bitcoin faucet. You just had to put in your email address and you got like 10,000 Bitcoin or whatever it was. But that made sense. I mean, think about it. The first time you went up and found the pile of rocks that were gold, you probably found buckets full at the beginning of the mine and you were bringing them back. And like to get them into the economy, you probably had to sell them for a little bit less than you knew they were going to be worth if you really believed in this thing, if you understood what you found, because you had to get them out. And there's no way to distribute them now. And back to the orange pilling conversation, a lot of times I see people like, oh, hey, what if I sent you $10 in Bitcoin or $100 in Bitcoin so you can receive it and feel like what it means and watch it go up and down? And I really get that because I think people need to have skin in the game. But in a way, you've de-skinned them in the game. You've given it away for free. You've now devalued the very thing that you want them to see as the most valuable thing in the world. Hey, Luke's got enough for this thing where he can give it to me for free. And he's telling me this is the most valuable thing in the world. I don't know. That's hard to square, right? Why is Luke giving it to me for free? Free things tend to not be valuable. And it's so even sending people that you love $10 in Bitcoin might not be getting the message across that you want, And they might even be like, wow, Luke probably got this when Bitcoins were 10 cents a piece. Maybe Luke's got a million of these things. He's just giving them to me for free. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around that.
I
So
wish I had a million Bitcoin.
same
That'd
thing,
be nice.
right? But same
Yeah.
thing with those people giving away the free sats. The recipient doesn't value this. Well, they're just giving me 50,000 sats for free. They're not even valuable. You see the commercial, you see like TikTok videos all the time, and not all the time, but like, do you want $5 or a Bitcoin? And most respondents will be like, well, $5. Or let's take a different number, $1,000 or a Bitcoin. And they'll just say to you, well, what can you do with a Bitcoin? But they know what $1,000 can buy them. They understand it very intuitively, and it doesn't sound like as free. It's
It's
so
your kid. It's your kid with the TV, right?
right.
With Pinchick, they understand one technology but not the other, right?
Well, why isn't it
Same thing.
ubiquitous? Yeah, why isn't it ubiquitous and just why didn't the TV company just offer this at the same price as the iPhone company? Like, why haven't they caught up? Like why would that be more expensive? You know, at least in relative terms. Obviously, the screen size is bigger, it might be a little bit more money, but yeah, it's hard for people to, I really think Bitcoin is about solving people's problems. So I came to Bitcoin because Bitcoin was running in 2017. It was one of the very few things I'd ever speculated on my life, but it it was going to solve the inflation problem for me because nothing else in my life was offering that opportunity. It's still back in 2017 when I first discovered it seemed like pure speculation to me. It wasn't rational. I was kind of trying to grok some of the ideas. It sounded very big. It sounded like the most asymmetric thing I could put a little money into. But if it worked, and obviously it's worked, and so many more layers to it have been added, but and I don't think it's now just colloquially a way to hedge against inflation. I don't think that's the right way to look at it. But I felt that in the fiat matrix, I was in a red queen's race. And unless I started a business that I had inside advantage on, and starting a business could be very hard. Unless my cousin was going to start a bar where we knew the mayor was going to give us a liquor license over anyone else, there were no bets that I could find that I had an advantage in. The advantage in Bitcoin is knowledge. It's not any sort of advantage in the protocol other than learning about it and accepting that it can be what it rationally is and what it's designed to do. So, and I've always was seeking an opportunity where I could like brain my way into a good opportunity. Not just with my bare hands and yeah, I can build a wall better than the next guy hire me, or I could build a better roof, but like, how can I nerd my way into a better life? You know? And, with things like stocks or real estate, there was just so much outside of my control in terms of you could buy real estate. Well, great. You bought a brownstone in New York City and you got a cute view of Gramercy Park. Boom, someone built a skyscraper behind your house. View's gone. Or you bought a retail location and you're going to get into commercial real estate and you got zoning issues, or, they raise the taxes on that thing, or Elon thinks, you think Tesla is the Amazon of cars and electricity and solar and all these things. And he goes and dilutes your position with new shares or debt, right? And so there's no insider access or advantage in any of these things. They're not democratized in that sense of the word. Even the stock market, through the IPO racket, you hear about in Amazon in 1994. Well, you're not going to get an entry position until 1998, until everyone in Silicon Valley got an insider position and marked it up. And then every VC firm and PE firm and every investment bank gets a position for you. And then they dump on you on IPO day, et cetera. So there was no fair shot at anything. And now you can own this thing where like once you understand it and you get your position, whatever position you have, no one can come between you and the thing. Only yourself, only you can lose it, if you don't take care of it properly.
Cedric, there's so many good points in there. The The first one that stands out is what you just said with Amazon. People ask me, "Are you early to Bitcoin? Am I too late to Bitcoin?" Okay, what you just described of Amazon 1994 versus Amazon in 1998. Bitcoin right now is like Amazon in 1997, right? This like isn't
1991.
even
It's like still like the
yeah, yeah.
internet.
I
Go
real
back to, I mean, yeah, it's just like the internet
yeah,
though. It's like the internet in like 1985. Or this is
I
like the
I
internet in
agree.
1994 when I was on those AOL discs and I got 1,000 free hours and I would go into an AOL walled garden. I mean, that's what a Bitcoin circular economy is. It's like four people, in Tampa selling beef, tallow, wine, and coffee. But that's like that like the whole foreign exchange market is because of stupid fiat currencies. And you want to build a product. Well, you have to hedge all the currencies of all the materials of all the raw resources you want all over the world. And nothing makes sense in anything in economics. So it's like the one thing that always gets me is like my parents spent their whole lives being public school teachers. And at the end of their career, they were way better at teaching than at the beginning of their career. So I'll make some numbers up. Let's say at the end of their career, they made $50,000 a year. Well, the kid out of college, just starting out, was making 55 with no experience. Now imagine, you're hiring a line worker and you're like, okay, how much do my workers make this year? Well, Bob, we have 20 teachers and budget's $1 million for teachers. How much is it going to cost me next year? Well, it's going to cost you 1,000,001. Okay. Are they better teachers? No. Do they have more experience? No. Like, why am I paying more for less? Same thing with like you're making pencils. Like next year, hey, we put rubber in the pencils, right? Yeah, great. How much did we spend on rubber this year? 1 million. FP&A comes back. Well, rubber's going to cost us a 1,500,000 next year. Is the rubber better? No. Is it gonna be going through our machines in a way that gunks them up less? No. Or are workers going to be able to make the pencils faster now? No. Why am I paying more? Well, the guy who makes the rubbers, he's young and he's out of school and he's got loans and debt. Now, how does that make any sense? And so you get rid of all of this and you're unlocking so much potential, much less the kid in Africa or Brazil who'd love to make software or anything but can't get paid, because a wire would cost more than it would to upload the app to iTunes or something. Just all the potential that'd be unlocked. So it's like we can't even imagine all that. That's where like even if you put all the money in the world on Bitcoin, you still get more money because we're just going to create more value because we're going to be able to communicate better around money and through money.
Yeah, more productivity indefinitely, right? That's the whole there's no price top
Less
idea. Um,
malinvestment, more
uh-huh.
long-term investment,
Yep.
more meaningful projects, right? More excellence, more quality, less things that are built to break and break down or be thrown out.
Yeah,
Maybe a
yeah,
washer
definitely.
machine
Yeah,
that lasts more than 3 or 5 years, um, like the old days. I mean,
yeah,
and
for sure.
but all that makes everything, I think, better for people, regardless if they own any Bitcoin. So it's like you
They
don't even
they
have
they
to,
benefit from the second order effects. Yeah.
right, and third
Yeah,
order
sorry. I
effects.
think I think we got a little bit of a lag back to podcast problems. Sorry about that. But yeah, I fully agree with that. The second order effects, I think everyone, even if they don't adopt Bitcoin, benefits from that. I fully agree with you there.
I mean, you had a
In
thread
regard,
about how Bitcoin saves 100 million lives or something, and that's probably bearish. Um, but it's like that was an eye-opening thread for me because it's like it's going to change humanity in ways that do not impact how you think about your own savings, right? So just the way that you can go buy like Big Macs they used to be two for $5. Now what are they, two for 10? Like they're not bigger, they're not tastier, they're not hotter. They get smaller. That doesn't make sense. Everything, with price of tomorrow and Jeff Booth, everything should be getting cheaper towards zero.
right.
Not just in Bitcoin terms. It should have just been happening in monetary terms, in value
Yeah.
terms. And so that just unleashes so much potential for people who are not even thinking about, oh, I'm moving on a Bitcoin standard. It's just the ground underneath them will shift and they'll benefit tremendously from that. And then people won't even have to, like, people won't even, you won't even, no one would wear Bitcoin paraphernalia the way people don't wear dollar signs today. I mean, that would just be gaudy.
No one wears an internet ball cap. It's just it makes no sense. Yeah, the thread you mentioned, just for context for those listening, the thread Cedric's mentioning is a thread I made about how I elaborated how I believe Bitcoin could save 100 million lives, or perhaps better way to put it is prevent 100 million preventable deaths by the end of the century, right? That was my prediction. And I agree with Cedric. I think that's bearish. Simply put, one way to frame that is that 4.6 million people die a year due to lack of heat, right? So that's either directly via cold or indirectly via disease. And so, to Cedric's point, what if we could price energy in a currency that's not forcing energy to be more expensive every year, right? So if you just take that number, 4.3 million, take a relatively conservative number of that 4.6, roughly 500,000, 460,000. You aggregate that out to the end of the century, that's easily tens of millions of people there alone. What if it's 20%? What if it's beyond that? And I think the important thing, Cedric, you'd like this too, but what I didn't say in the thread, or I don't think I did, again, going back to the S curve idea, like to me, the single largest concern I have, it's not even necessarily war, although it could be a component of it. The single largest concern I have, economically speaking, is human population is on an exponential curve, right? And the energy needs are on an exponential curve. But fiat, as you put out pretty well with the pencil example, makes things less efficient, right? And so I'm concerned that as the timeline of this curve shrinks, as technology iterates faster and faster and faster, it only becomes increasingly more important that we keep the S curve of energy production up with consumption. Like it becomes increasingly more important, and as that curve becomes steeper and as the timeline becomes shorter, the let's say opportunity cost, that's perhaps a bad way to put it, but that becomes exponentially more expensive, right? We may not have a war, we may not have a global, famine, we may not have this, the other, but the every year we slow down the rate of cancer research. Every year we slow down efficiency in the energy sector, right? That's more people freezing to death every year. That's more, and so to me, that beyond making food better, everyone talks about that. Beyond making money better, everyone talks about that. Beyond improving energy efficiency and getting everyone unified, like to me, it's those unknowns of the next iterations of the S curve that it's like that's what's important. The technologies that aren't even invented yet, and the problems of the 2050s that we can't even imagine yet. It's like it is so critical. I think we get Bitcoin as widely adopted as fast as possible, or at least people in that direction, because I think the again, compounding effect, that interest is going to have an increasing gap between those two S curves, and I want to close that gap. Obviously, we can all do our best. What's going to happen is it's going to happen. It's not up to us, but you know, Cedric, I think you'd probably agree with that. But anyway, just to give more context on that for people that, that's really why we put the 8 to 15 hours in these podcasts, right? That's because we care about S curves of the 2050s or whatever. So anyway,
I always wonder, I don't like to say, I don't think that Satoshi made any mistakes, but if I had to call something his biggest mistake, I think that Bitcoin should have been sats. And I don't think anything should be changed. And I'm not saying that I haven't thought this through to maybe the utmost degree, but instead of having a Bitcoin be broken down, we should never have started with that. So a Bitcoin should have been built up. So there should be, 100 million Bitcoins in a Bitcoin. And we should have just had Bitcoins and 2.1 quadrillion Bitcoins. And then if we wanted to lump 100 million of them together, call that whatever, a deca Bitcoin or whatever you want to call it. And I think that would have, because I think a lot of people do get caught up in unit price bias. And I don't think we should change anything to assuage these people or bring them in now. But it would have been very interesting. And because 21 million is arbitrary. And obviously 2.1 quadrillion doesn't sound scarce as 21 million does. But even 21 million doesn't sound scarce to normies and digital, sort of when they think about Bitcoin. But I always wonder, like, because people don't, trying to explain to people like that you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. But a lot of people get really, they don't feel. I think that's been a big sort of mental block for a lot of people. I talk a lot, and I got this from Jimbo, but he was talking about how when Bitcoin hits $1 million per Bitcoin, that's 1 cent a sat. And on that night, say that happens at like 8:17, p.m. on a Tuesday night, and you log on to Swan or River, or Coinbase or Fidelity or Bank of America, wherever they're selling Bitcoin at this point, and it's 1 cent a sat, and you're like, why wouldn't I pay 2 cents a sat? Like that's very different from why wouldn't I pay 2 million a Bitcoin? But 1 cent a sat sounds cheap. And we're so far from 1 cent a sat. But why wouldn't it be 2 cents a sat? Why wouldn't it go to that on the overnight? Like you'd be
Right.
like, shit, it hit 1 cent a sat. Fuck, I'll pay 2 cents. And the ETF does that. And I don't care about the ETF too much in terms of I don't know. I don't know how to I don't think it's important for Bitcoin, but it seems to be interesting for retail maybe or institutional investment. I don't know if one's guaranteed or coming, but it does change the price around
It's a
Bitcoin.
mixed bag.
It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting vector, but especially around self-custody. But um, it changes the price point around Bitcoin. Right now you can go on GBTC and it's obviously on a discount, but it's like $36 a share, right? And you need 1,000 shares to represent, ownership in a Bitcoin. But a lot of people are going to see $36 a share, and some of these are going to be 36 cents a share or 36 $3 and 60 cents a share. And a lot of people are going to be very much. It's going to be a lot easier for people to see a 10x or 100x or 1,000x at those price points, and sort of the future in fiat terms with those numbers. Um, and so it would have been interesting if Bitcoin had that built into the protocol where the unit was the SAT. Instead of why
Yeah.
we made the unit 100 million of something. I'm not sure why we made that the thing we talk about. And it's because, that thing back in the day was so not valuable. You could buy 6,000, 2,000 Satoshi Bitcoin for like $5 back in the day or whatever it was. But, in the future, the lower time preference would have been to still go by the Satoshi as the unit of account. I think that
Yeah.
would be a
I
little lower
think,
time preference.
yeah, I hear what you're saying. I disagree with it personally.
Which
I
is
mean,
great because I probably disagree with it if I talked about it another day too.
yeah, yeah. But I think even though 99% of Bitcoin's existence people think in sats and like the first 1% people actually think in Bitcoins or multiple whole coins. Like I think that's essential though, because I think if in those first 3, 5, 10 years or whatever, people were only thinking in sats, not Bitcoins, then I don't think, because I think it's super
Well, they
unit
wouldn't
bias is
know. They
such,
they they would just be
yeah, they
thinking in
would,
Bitcoins and they wouldn't know. And we would just be on a
yeah,
longer
but
term trajectory. Right now, Bitcoin, 100 million Bitcoin would just be worth, or it would be worth whatever it's worth. It just, we would have started with a lower unit, a smaller unit. But it's kind of like
yeah, but
most.
I think to your point though of the giveaway sats are free, no one will care about it. I think that's the same idea here that if you say Bitcoin pizza day, right, 10,000 Bitcoin for two pizzas, that's 5,000 Bitcoin a pizza. If you say okay, what's 100 million times 5,000? That's 500 million. So okay, like look, okay, like 500 billion Bitcoins for a pizza. It's like
It's right. It just would have been an
it's
exchange rate.
absurd. Yeah,
It is
yeah,
absurd, but we would have eventually gotten to at least a less absurd place. But I think what's hard, like when people are like, "Oh wow, a Bitcoin's really expensive," I want to be like, "So is $1 million bill." But no one thinks about how they're trading or buying their way to hopefully $1 million bill, right? You go and you work
yeah.
for $15 an hour, or $50 an hour, or $100 an hour, or $5 an hour, whatever you earn, and you're trading your way towards more money, right? And a lot of people think of a millionaire as a lot of money in America, and maybe it still is, maybe it isn't. But my point is like they're not thinking about how do I get $1 million bill. They're more than happy to like get $100 bill or a $10 bill. They're not like, oh, I don't want that because it's not the whole thing. And or I can't
Yeah.
have it yet
Yeah.
because I can't afford the whole thing, therefore I don't want it, or I'm not going to buy it today, or I'm not going to start my journey towards it. So it sounds like a big journey when we're talking about the 100 million of the thing, when the 3 million of the thing is just representative of how much 1 million sats or whatever it is, it's just trading at that rate. You're just trading in at whatever value you can, and you don't have to buy the whole thing. So why did we colloquially coalesce around 100 million of the unit? It's just interesting to me. And maybe the whole thing would have backfired if we took my approach. Maybe
Yeah.
Satoshi really spent, I wonder how long he spent thinking, not just the 21 million based on sort of that formula, but whether it was going to be, whether we would describe the unit around the Bitcoin or the Satoshi. And I don't think he
Yeah.
named the Satoshi. He just knew that the Bitcoin had 8 decimals, right? And I think
Right.
he was looking at it from that perspective, right? This thing has eight
Yeah.
decimals. Whereas maybe we just talked about the decimal and built it up from scratch and said the decimal makes up the thing. And then we would have a
Yeah.
very different unit price bias. That's all I'm trying to say.
No, no, I get it. I think about unit bias all the time. In fact, I probably should make more videos talking about it because most of my videos, including this one, it's going to have like a bunch of zeros in the title, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's why to bring people in. But the funny thing is that I think about Cedric is that I think the whole reason political currency has survived as long as it has is because it specifically hijacks unit price, and it survives at first by doing it over a very slow time period, and then as inflation increases, the only thing that's changing is the timeline, right? There is no technical difference between hyperinflation and regular inflation. The only difference is time, right? The only difference is that the time that the unit bias is shifting fast enough that you realize it's happening, right? So, as an example, to finish out this point, is that in 1932, the average household income was $17 a week. Okay, but my grandmother was born 1932. Okay, like she's alive. She's like across the street from me right now. It's like that's her lifetime. $17 a week. Okay, now an average American family probably I don't know, like $1,700 a week is good, right? I mean that's 84 grand a year, right? I mean after taxes, that's like 50 grand. I mean
Yeah.
probably a
That
lot of
puts you in a
families
very
could
high percentile in America.
for the whole family,
Yeah.
husband
Yeah.
and wife, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And so it's like okay, we
But
did
the purchasing power of
100x.
that 84,000 or whatever that comes out to is
Right.
way less.
Yeah.
And
Right.
people, I don't people think people realize like how much worse off we are as a society now than we were then
Right.
economically. Maybe not in
Yeah.
comfort, maybe not in comfort, but in pure economic terms, way worse than the Great Depression ever was. Part of that, I think, the evolution of
Hmm.
technology. I mean, like most people in America probably have more resources at their disposal than a king 1,000 years ago. More manpower, at
Right.
least, more horsepower. In terms of even just getting on a public bus. Um, so
Or in terms of hosting a podcast that could be globally listened to by people where you can talk to the world's I mean, it's like you and me, we get to talk to the world's smartest people, like the best king or emperor 500 years ago. They couldn't talk to, who they would interpret
even
as
if
the
they had
top
agreed
minds of the
upon
world.
it, yeah, it would be hard to arrange and
Right.
coordinate and keep the
Right. A
conversation
conversation.
going. And whether
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
over mail or whatever, and it wouldn't be as spontaneous and organic or yeah, no, for sure. And again, that's just an unlocking of knowledge. And that unlocking of
Mm-hmm.
knowledge creates value in and of itself that I think we haven't even begun to comprehend what Bitcoin will afford human civilization. Um, and so then that just then flows back into, so at that point, it's not that like Bitcoin creates all this value. It does, I think it helps unlock it, but the value is there to be created within mankind. Bitcoin is just a more accurate register of capturing it and harnessing it. So, and then re-expressing it. So, mankind would get there without Bitcoin, I think eventually. It would just, the idea of Bitcoin, if Bitcoin fails, the idea will be recreated somewhere else. In a way that doesn't create inflation. Because the reason I don't think Bitcoin could ever be copied or shitcoins don't matter from a monetary perspective is that To have uninflatable money can only be discovered once. If you discover it twice, it's therefore inflatable. So you can, if you only have 21 million, you can't do it again. Um, so yeah, I just think I think it's one of the first true paradigm shifts in humanity. Probably
Well, like
along the
that
lines
goes
of the
that
wheel or fire.
that goes back to the gold, right? Like the gold's there whether you dig it up or not. And the same
Right.
thing with Bitcoin is that humans will make the economic value whether Bitcoin exists or not. It's just will political currency confiscate that value and destroy that value once it's been created or dug out of the
And
ground, or
right.
will it be harnessed and preserved like Bitcoin?
But it
So
silos that value too, because it's like your world, you're on a certain rail with the dollar. You can't go to Nigeria and spend your money. That was one of the most. It was Russell Okung was on Peter McCormick, what Bitcoin did, and Russell was talking about how when he went to visit Nigeria during the off season, and he brought like a certain amount of money with him to spend while he was there, and he ran out of cash. And he called up his bank and was like, I need you to send more cash. And they're like, we're not going to send you cash to a Nigerian bank. We don't do business with them. They're not on the rails of the dollar. And he's like, and he's in a position where physically he's putting a lot more on the line to earn that money than a lot of humans do. And he's like, I laid out my life for this money and I want to use this money, my value, my wealth, whatever, in Nigeria to visit my ancestral homeland or however, and you won't let me use my money. And so now you have implications beyond that, sort of purchasing power value, but just being able to do what you want with your money. It's as simple as like you go to the bank and like try to take out more than $500 from the ATM of your money. Like they'll limit you to those two a day or something like that, right? Two per, like why? Like it's literally your money. Why are they putting like, what are they trying to do? Moral restriction? Like we were afraid you're going to spend too much of your own money. Go into a bank and try to take out more than five or $10,000 of your money and try to get it done in less than like 6 hours, of questioning and interrogation. What are you going to do with the money? And why don't you want to? Do you have a plan for money? Like I remember trying to put money in it. I sold my house. I tried to put money in it. Do you have a plan? But why are you asking me this? There's no fiduciary relationship here. You're not looking out for me. I get maybe he wants to sell me something, but like there's rules around moving your money around. It's your money. And that's absurd. And can you really put a price on that? I mean, imagine you wake up tomorrow and they're like, you can't use your money for whatever reason, cyber attack, whatever it might be. That's really scary. And I'm not talking about, okay, Mad Max and what a Bitcoiner going to do and how are we going to trade paper and we'll figure that out. But that's not the point. The point is like, is it your money or not? Especially if it's not even there. I
yeah,
don't know. People
definitely.
say
Bitcoin is the
Bitcoin's
money
at
though.
risk.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Cedric, thank you so much for your time. As you wrap up here, there's one other thing that I want to touch on, and that's back to the S curves. So the political currency example, the Bitcoin example, and the technologist example is that, the political currency example is that, going from $17 a week to 1,700 a week is a 100x increase, and so the next iteration is going from $84,000 a year to 8.4 million a year. And then the next iteration after that is going to 800 million a year, right? So, the iteration we've had between 1932 and today, if we repeat that two more times, like $1 billion a year is going to be barely above median, right? Obviously, we're talking long periods of time, but I think in that S curve, or again, that goes back to the beginning of the conversation, right? Full circle. That's the S curve down that most people in fiat are on. They're going to be needing to earn, it's like I can't imagine telling my grandmother's parents when she was a newborn, hey, when she is alive, she's born right now. When she's alive, she's going to live to see a day where you have to make $1,700 a week. They're like, that's more than I earn in a year, right? I mean, it's like that's the exponential curve, the S curve that's inverted down. And the S curve Cedric here has pointed out so well repeatedly in this conversation is Bitcoin's this S curve up. And it's, in my opinion, it's a faster S curve. And it's really important people, even in Bitcoin, are on that S curve of knowledge, right? And so obviously something I'm passionate about, something Cedric is also passionate about, is the knowledge of custody and self custody. So, Cedric, you recently joined me at, me and Peter and all them at the Bitcoin Advisor. We've alluded to self custody a few times in this conversation. Um, I really encourage people to take this seriously. Cedric, could you drop some knowledge on all of us so that maybe we can help accelerate ourselves along that S curve so that we can be, as far on that S curve as we possibly can be, even though we don't know where it's going in 20 years. Like, what do people need to be thinking about when it comes to self custody and specifically multi sig?
Yes, when it comes to self custody and specifically multi sig, and I think comes with anything in life, is you want to eliminate a single point of failure. And I think when you're first starting out with Bitcoin, you think of the single point of failure as the $5 wrench attack, or the exchange attack, or losing your keys that way, losing your sats that way. But I think in all practicality, you yourself is probably your most biggest risk of a single point of failure. And so I think you need to think through your attack vector and your risk vector and eliminate how you could um, fail at keeping your Bitcoin secure, not just for yourself, for generations. I think that's where people really get caught up too, is so even if you eliminate yourself as a single point of failure, if you take yourself out of the program, is anyone else going to be able to retrieve your Bitcoin? Your loved ones, your family members, so do you have multi-generational security around your Bitcoin? So I think what the Bitcoin provider, the Bitcoin advisor, and the solutions that are being offered there is the best way to manage all of that risk through collaborative custody. You maintain enough sovereignty to give you the security and the peace of mind and independence that you need, but you eliminate all single points of failure. And I think that you know you just want to be able to sleep at night, and I think that's actually helped people probably maybe even go more all in on Bitcoin, is once they get to that place where they can fully ascertain that everything is accounted for, then it feels, I think, a lot more comfortable. So um, I really encourage people to value what they have and take possession of it. Just in terms of the sats you leave on an exchange also, is price suppression. You're adding to liquidity in the market and the appearance of Satoshis for sale and a supply that's available. And that's hopefully not the truth. So, and you want to eliminate counterparty risk. So,
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Cedric. If you want to contact myself or Cedric at the Bitcoin Advisor, please use the link in the description. I fully agree with Cedric. If you're keeping Bitcoin on exchanges, not taking your Bitcoin custody seriously, like the fastest way to stack more Bitcoin is actually take ownership of what you own. And then additionally, like Cedric said, you gain the confidence, you can, and then increase your stack faster and all that beyond that, which I think is a huge value added benefit, that peace of mind. And that'll just make life more enjoyable too. And then also you're forcing number go up faster because you are draining the exchanges faster. You're
yep.
suppressing price a little less. So
You're acting
Cedric,
in your
thank you
own
so
best
much.
interest.
Yes, your own best interest. Yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed this. Cedric, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to spend my 8 hours now and edit this thing and get it scheduled and uploaded, and hopefully people enjoy it. But Cedric, it's a huge pleasure to have you on here. Thank you so much. People know where to find you: Twitter, YouTube, Bitcoin Matrix. Everyone check them out. And yeah, Cedric, thank you for coming on and giving us a little bit more knowledge so that we can be ahead on the S curve. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Luke. This has been dope.